The invitation never came. Instead, I heard the words that cut deeper than any silence. "Don't come to your grandson's birthday." My own daughter's voice, cold, final, as if I didn't belong. In that moment, it felt like years of sacrifice, of late nights, of giving everything for her future, were tossed aside like they meant nothing. But inside me, something stronger rose. If she thought she could erase me with those words, she forgot one thing: love can't be banned. And that day, I had one weapon left. The gift I was preparing. It wasn't just a present. It was my answer. It was my revenge. My name is Michael Turner. And today, you'll hear how a father who was cast aside turned a simple gift into a lesson his whole family would never forget. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments, have you ever been treated as if you didn't deserve to be part of your own family's celebrations? But first, let me tell you who I was before that birthday, and why my own daughter thought she could ban me from the life I helped build. My name is Michael Turner, and at 67, I thought I understood what family meant. I'd spent 40 years building Turner Custom Furniture, a small shop in Cedar Falls, Iowa, where every piece told a story and every customer became a friend. Helen, my wife of 38 years, often joked that I put more love into a dining table than most people put into their marriages. She wasn't wrong. Each mortise and tenon joint, every hand-sanded curve represented the same devotion I'd poured into raising our daughter Jessica. The same patience it took to teach a stubborn piece of oak to bend was the patience I'd used to help Jessica through algebra homework, teenage heartbreak, and college applications. Jessica had been the light of our lives from the moment she drew her first breath in October of 1987. Helen and I spent countless evenings planning her future, dreaming of the woman she'd become, the family she'd create. We saved every penny we could, working extra hours and skipping vacations to make sure she had opportunities we'd never had. "She's going to change the world," Helen would whisper, as we watched 5-year-old Jessica organize her dolls with the precision of a military general. "She's going to be stronger than both of us," I'd reply, meaning every word. And for 29 years, I believed that was exactly what had happened. Jessica graduated summa cum laude from the University of Iowa, married Brad Thompson in a wedding that cost us most of our savings and gave us the most precious gift imaginable, our grandson, Tommy. Tommy, the little boy who'd inherited Jessica's determined spirit and my stubborn chin. At 7 months old, he was already showing signs of the Turner family curiosity, reaching for everything within grasp and studying the world with wide, intelligent eyes. I'd been counting the days until Tommy's first birthday party, already planning the handcrafted rocking horse I'd been secretly building in my workshop. Helen had been knitting blankets and buying tiny outfits, both of us giddy with grandparent pride. That's why Jessica's phone call on October 15th hit me like a 2x4. To the chest. "Dad, I need to talk to you about Tommy's birthday party." I was in my workshop, putting the finishing touches on the rocking horse's mane, carved to look like it was flowing in an imaginary wind. "What about it, sweetheart?" Helen's been asking. "About what we should bring besides the rocking horse." There was a pause, a long, uncomfortable pause that made my hands still on the wood. "Actually, Dad, I think it would be better if you and Mom didn't come this year." The words didn't make sense at first. I set down my carving knife and walked to the window, looking out at the October afternoon that suddenly felt colder. "What do you mean, sweetheart? It's Tommy's first birthday. We've been planning this for months, I know, but things have been complicated lately. Brad and I think it might be better to keep things small this year." Small. But I knew that wasn't true. Helen had mentioned seeing Jessica's Facebook posts about the party decorations, the catered food, the guest list that included Brad's entire extended family. "Jessica, what's really going on here?" Another pause. Then her voice changed, taking on the sharp edge I'd been hearing more often since her marriage to Brad. You really want to know, Dad? Fine. This is about the loan, about your complete lack of faith in our family. The loan. 3 weeks earlier, Brad had asked to borrow $150,000 to expand his used car lot. He'd presented it as a sure thing, a guaranteed investment that would double his income within 2 years. When I'd asked about the $30,000 he'd borrowed from me over the past year, money that had never been repaid despite repeated promises, he'd gotten defensive. That's different, Michael. Those were emergency situations. This is a business opportunity. I'd said no, not because I didn't have the money, not because I didn't want them to succeed, but because Brad had a pattern of treating my wallet like his personal ATM while treating my advice like unwanted interference. Jessica, the loan has nothing to do with faith. It has to do with responsibility. Does it, Dad? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you care more about your precious money than you do about your family's future. The accusation stung because it was so unfair. Helen and I had been supporting Brad and Jessica in small ways for 3 years, helping with their mortgage when Brad's car sales were slow, buying groceries when money was tight, paying for Tommy's childcare so Jessica could work part-time. That's not fair, and you know it. What I know is that Brad's family believes in supporting each other. His parents helped us with the down payment on the house. His uncle co-signed the loan for the car lot. They understand what family means. What she didn't mention was that Brad's parents were wealthy retirees who treated their son's business, ventures like expensive hobbies. His uncle owned a chain of dealerships and could absorb the loss if Brad's lot failed. I was a small-town furniture maker who'd worked 40 years to build a modest nest egg. Jessica, I've supported you your entire life. College tuition, wedding costs, help with the house, money for emergencies. How does that translate to not believing in family? Supporting us when it's convenient for you isn't the same as believing in us when we need it most. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of an argument I couldn't win. In Jessica's mind, my refusal to hand over $150,000 with no repayment plan had become evidence that I didn't love my family enough. So because I won't risk our retirement savings on Brad's expansion, I'm banned from my grandson's first birthday party. You're not banned, Dad. It would be better if you didn't come. Maybe we can do something small with you and Mom later in the week. Something small later in the week. A consolation prize for the grandfather who'd apparently failed to prove his love through financial sacrifice. What does Helen think about this decision? Mom will understand. She always does. But Helen didn't understand. When I told her about Jessica's call, she sat down heavily in her rocking chair, the first piece of furniture I'd ever made for her, and started crying quietly. She's using Tommy as a weapon, Helen said finally. She's punishing you for being responsible by taking away the one thing she knows will hurt you most. Helen was right. Tommy's first birthday would happen once in his lifetime, and I was going to miss it because I'd refused to enable my son-in-law's financial irresponsibility. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the rocking horse in my workshop, carved with the same care I'd put into Jessica's childhood furniture. I thought about the birthdays I'd missed working overtime to pay for her college, the sacrifices I'd made to give her opportunities, the dreams I'd deferred so she could chase hers, and now she was treating my love like a business transaction with terms I'd failed to meet. But lying there in the dark, listening to Helen's quiet breathing beside me, I realized something important. Jessica might be able to ban me from Tommy's birthday party, but she couldn't ban me from loving him. She couldn't erase 38 years of devoted parenting with one phone call. If she wanted to play games with invitations and ultimatums, I'd show her what real family love looked like. Not the conditional kind that came with price tags and loan requirements, but the unconditional kind that found a way to reach out even when doors were slammed shut. The next morning, I walked into my workshop and looked at the nearly finished rocking horse. Tommy would still get his present, but not the way Jessica expected. I was going to teach my daughter a lesson about the difference between love that demands payment and love that gives without condition. She'd banned me from the party, but she was about to discover that some gifts can't be stopped by hurt feelings and closed doors. The workshop had always been my sanctuary. 40 years of sawdust and wood stain, of early mornings and late nights, of turning raw lumber into pieces that families would treasure for generations. But that morning, with October sunlight streaming through the east window, it felt more like a confessional. I stood before the rocking horse I'd been crafting for Tommy, running my weathered hands along the smooth curves I'd sanded, with the patience of a man who understood that some things couldn't be rushed. The mane flowed like frozen wind, each strand carved individually. The eyes held the gentle wisdom I'd tried to capture, the same expression I'd seen in the horses of my own childhood on my grandfather's farm. This horse was supposed to be my legacy to Tommy, a piece of his grandfather's. Love made tangible in grain and polish. Helen appeared in the workshop doorway with 2 cups of coffee, her grey hair still mussed from sleep. After 38 years of marriage, she could read my moods like I read the patterns in wood. "You've been out here since 5 in the morning," she said, setting 1 cup on my workbench. "Want to talk about it?" I accepted the coffee gratefully, inhaling the familiar comfort of our morning ritual. I keep thinking about all the things I did for Jessica that she's apparently forgotten, such as, I gestured toward the corner where I kept my photo albums, dusty now but filled with memories that suddenly felt precious and fragile. "Remember when she was 12 and decided she wanted to learn violin?" Helen smiled despite the sadness in her eyes. "You worked weekends for 3 months to pay for lessons and that little rental violin. And when the high school music teacher said she had real talent, I took on that kitchen renovation job for the Andersons. 6 weeks of 12-hour days so we could buy her a decent instrument. You came home every night covered in drywall dust, hands so sore you could barely hold a fork." I walked to the album and pulled out a photo from Jessica's high school graduation. There she was, beaming in her cap and gown, violin case in one hand, acceptance letter to the University of Iowa in the other. Between us stood the younger version of myself, tired but proud, wearing the only suit I owned. 4 years of college tuition, I continued. We refinanced the house twice, ate more beans and rice than any family should have to eat, but we never let her know how tight things were, because you didn't want her to feel guilty about pursuing her dreams. And when she graduated with that English degree, couldn't find a job and wanted to go back for her teaching certificate, you sold your grandfather's antique tools to pay for her graduate program. The memory hit harder than I'd expected. Those tools had been passed down through 3 generations of Turner men. My grandfather had taught my father to work with them. My father had taught me, and I'd planned to teach Jessica's children someday, but Jessica needed money for school, and tools could be replaced. Family legacy, apparently, was more flexible than I'd thought. When she married Brad, and they wanted that big church wedding, $23,000, Helen said quietly, nearly our entire savings account, because she deserved to start her marriage the way she'd always dreamed. I pulled out the wedding photos, remembering the joy on Jessica's face as she walked down the aisle. She'd looked radiant, perfect, like a princess from a fairy tale. Brad had looked proud and confident, like a man ready to build a life with the woman he loved. Looking at those photos now, I wondered when gratitude had transformed into expectation. "Helen, do you remember the conversation we had the night before? The wedding? Which one? We had several. The one where you asked me if I thought Brad really understood what Jessica meant to us." Helen was quiet for a moment, her coffee growing cold in her hands. "You said you hoped he'd love her the way she deserved to be loved. And you said you hoped he'd never make her choose between him and us." "I was wrong to worry about that," Helen said with bitter irony. He didn't make her choose. He just convinced her that choosing him meant viewing us as obstacles to overcome rather than resources to treasure. I closed the photo album and returned to the rocking horse. Every curve and joint represented hours of work, but more than that, it represented dreams. Dreams of teaching Tommy to ride, of watching his face light up when he saw his special horse, of being the grandfather who made magical things appear in his grandson's world. Helen, can I tell you something that's been eating at me? Always. $150,000 Brad wanted to borrow. I actually have it. Helen's eyebrows rose. I know you do. We've been blessed with the business doing well. No, I mean, I have it set aside specifically for Jessica and Tommy. I've been putting money away for years, planning to help with Tommy's college, or a down payment on a bigger house for them, or whatever they might need as he grows up. Then, why didn't you just give it to Brad for his expansion? I set down my coffee and picked up the sandpaper, needing to keep my hands busy while I explained the thoughts that had been churning in my mind for weeks. Because Brad doesn't ask for money like a man who needs help. He asks for money like a man who's entitled to it. There's a difference. What do you mean? When Jessica needed college tuition, she came to us with budgets and plans. She'd researched scholarship opportunities, looked into work-study programs, applied for financial aid. She asked for help filling the gaps in what she could provide for herself. I began sanding the rocking horse's neck, working with the grain the way my grandfather had taught me decades ago. When Brad asks for money, he presents it as an investment opportunity I'd be foolish to miss. Not as a favor, not as family helping family, but as a business deal where I should feel grateful for the chance to give him my money. And the previous loans? Emergencies, he said. Car repair that cost $3,000, then medical bills for $5,000, then temporary cash flow problems that required $12,000, then another $10,000 for what he called unexpected business expenses. $30,000. Total. $30,000 that was supposed to be repaid as soon as things turned around. But things never turn around for Brad because he keeps borrowing instead of budgeting. Helen walked to the window, looking out at the maple trees we'd planted when we first bought this house. Their leaves were just starting to turn, promising a beautiful autumn that I'd now associate forever with this painful conversation with Jessica. Michael, do you think we enabled Jessica somehow, made her feel like money should just appear when she needs it? The question I'd been avoiding hit me square in the chest. Had we? Had our desire to give Jessica opportunities we'd never had somehow created a daughter who viewed her parents' resources as her birthright? Maybe, I admitted. We never wanted her to worry about money the way we did as kids. Remember the Christmas when my dad lost his job and we had to choose between heat and presents? I remember you telling me about it, how your parents cried when they thought you and your brother were asleep. I swore Jessica would never feel that kind of financial fear. So every time money was tight, every time we had to sacrifice to help her, we hid it. We made it look easy. And now she thinks it is easy. I stopped sanding and looked at Helen, the woman who'd supported every difficult decision I'd made as a father, who'd gone without so Jessica could have more, who'd never once complained about the sacrifices we'd made. Helen, what if we were wrong? What if teaching her that money appears when you need it badly enough was the worst possible lesson we could have taught? Then we're seeing the consequences now. Brad's expansion isn't about business growth. It's about lifestyle inflation. He wants a bigger lot, fancier inventory, more employees, because he wants to feel like a successful businessman. But he doesn't want to do the slow, careful work of building success. And Jessica supports that. Jessica sees me refusing to fund Brad's dreams and interprets that as me not believing in their family. I resumed sanding, working through the frustration and disappointment with each stroke. But Helen, if I give Brad $150,000 with no repayment plan, no accountability, no consequences for the money he's already borrowed and never repaid, what am I teaching Tommy about how families handle money? That grandfathers exist to solve problems that parents create. Exactly. I'd be teaching my grandson that responsible people exist to enable irresponsible people, that hard work and careful planning are less important than knowing who to ask. When you need money, Helen returned to my side, placing her hand on my shoulder the way she'd done thousands of times over the decades. So what do we do about Tommy's birthday party? I looked at the rocking horse, nearly finished now, created with the same love and attention I'd put into every piece of furniture that bore the Turner name. We respect Jessica's decision. If she doesn't want us at the party, we won't go. But we make sure Tommy knows he has grandparents who love him, even if we're not physically present for his first birthday. The rocking horse, and something else. Something that shows Jessica the difference between love that comes with conditions and love that gives freely, even to people who don't appreciate it. Helen studied my face with the understanding that comes from 38 years of partnership. "What are you planning, Michael?" I smiled for the first time since Jessica's phone call, feeling the pieces of an idea begin to form in my mind like joints coming together in a well-planned piece of furniture. "I'm planning to teach our daughter that love isn't a business transaction, and that some gifts are more powerful when they come from a distance than when they're delivered in person." The rocking horse gleamed in the morning sunlight, patient and perfect, waiting for its moment to carry a message that words alone could never convey. The next few days passed in a strange suspension, like the quiet moments before a storm. Jessica didn't call to reconsider her decision, and I didn't call to argue with it. Helen and I moved through our routines with the careful politeness of people avoiding a conversation that might break something precious and irreparable. But I couldn't stop thinking about the last time I'd really talked to Jessica. Not the tense phone call about money, but a real conversation where we'd connected as father and daughter instead of as creditor and debtor. It had been 3 months ago, on a Sunday afternoon in July. She'd brought Tommy over for dinner, one of those golden Iowa summer evenings when the corn was high and the air was thick with the promise of a good harvest. Tommy had been crawling then, pulling himself around Helen's living room with the determined curiosity that reminded me so much of Jessica at that age. We'd baby-proofed the house months earlier, moving breakable items to higher shelves and covering electrical outlets with those little plastic plugs that somehow always disappeared when you needed them. "Dad, do you remember teaching me to use the lathe when I was Tommy's age?" Jessica had asked, watching her son explore the cabinet where I kept my woodworking magazines. "You were older than Tommy, maybe 2 or 3, and you were more interested in the wood shavings than the actual woodworking. I remember making piles of the curly shavings and pretending they were spaghetti. Your mother was convinced you were going to eat them." Jessica had laughed, the genuine laugh I remembered from her childhood, before money and marriage and adult responsibilities had complicated everything between us. "I've been thinking about getting Tommy some wooden toys. The kind you used to make for me. Everything in the stores is plastic and electronic now. I'd be happy to make some toys for him. A set of blocks maybe, or some simple puzzles." "Would you really? I know how busy you are with the shop." The question had surprised me. When had Jessica started thinking I was too busy for my grandson? When had I given her the impression that work came before family? "Sweetheart, I'm never too busy for Tommy. Or for you." She'd smiled then, but there was something wistful about it, as if she wasn't entirely convinced. "Brad thinks I'm silly for wanting wooden toys instead of the latest educational gadgets. What do you think?" "I think some of my best childhood memories involve playing with things you made for me. That little kitchen set, the dollhouse, the rocking chair that matched Mom's big one. I'd forgotten about that rocking chair. Jessica had been 5 when I'd made it, carefully scaled to her size, painted the same soft blue as Helen's chair so they could rock together in the evenings while Helen read stories aloud. I still have that rocking chair, I'd told her. It's up in the attic waiting for the next little one who might need it. Really? I thought it was long gone. Your mother made me promise to keep it. She said someday we might have grandchildren who would want to rock the same way their mommy did. Jessica had gotten quiet then, watching Tommy pull himself up against the coffee table, his little face scrunched with concentration as he worked to maintain his balance. Dad, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think I'm a good mother? The question had caught me completely off guard. Jessica, why would you even ask that? I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm just making it up as I go along. Like I don't have any idea what I'm doing. Sweetheart, every parent feels that way. Your mother and I spent your entire childhood convinced we were going to mess you up somehow. But you didn't. You gave me everything I needed. College, support, confidence. You made me feel like I could do anything. You can do anything. You're one of the strongest, smartest people I know. Then why do I feel so lost sometimes? I'd looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and seen past the confident mother and capable wife to the little girl who used to climb into my lap when she was scared or confused. What do you feel lost about? Money, mostly. Brad handles all the finances, but I can see the stress it causes him. The car lot is doing okay, but not great. We're always one bad month away from real problems. Have you talked to him about your concerns? I've tried, but he says I worry too much, that successful people take calculated risks and don't let fear hold them back. And what do you think about that? Jessica had been quiet for a moment, watching Tommy succeed in pulling himself to a standing position, his face bright with triumph at his accomplishment. I think there's a difference between calculated risks and wishful thinking, but I'm not the one with the business degree. Jessica, you don't need a business degree to have good instincts about money. That's what I keep telling myself, but when Brad presents these expansion plans with charts and projections, I feel like I'm being small-minded for worrying about things like emergency funds and debt-to-income ratios. Those aren't small-minded concerns. They're responsible adult concerns. Really? Really? Your mother and I built this business by worrying about exactly those things. We never expanded until we could afford it, never borrowed money we couldn't pay back, never risked our stability for the chance of getting rich quick. But you're not rich. The comment hadn't stung because it was true. Helen and I were comfortable, secure, but we weren't wealthy by most people's standards. No, we're not rich. But we're also not stressed about money. We sleep well at night. We've never missed a mortgage payment or maxed out a credit card. We've been able to help you when you needed it without sacrificing our own security. Is that enough? Just being comfortable and secure? For us it is, but you and Brad might want something different, and that's okay too. Just make sure you're working toward the same goals. What do you mean? I mean, make sure you both understand what you're sacrificing for what you're trying to gain, and make sure you're both comfortable with those trade-offs. Jessica had nodded thoughtfully, but I could see her mind working, processing the implications of what I'd said. Dad, if Brad came to you for business advice, would you give it to him? Of course I would, even if he didn't like the advice you gave him, especially if he didn't like it. The advice you don't want to hear is usually the advice you need most. Now, 3 months later, sitting in my workshop with Jessica's angry words echoing in my memory, I wondered if that conversation had been the beginning of the end. Had Jessica repeated our discussion to Brad? Had my gentle questions about their financial goals been interpreted as criticism or interference? More importantly, had my offer to give Brad business advice been seen as an insult rather than an offer of support? I picked up the rocking horse and examined it in the afternoon light. The finish was perfect, the proportions exactly right for a 1-year-old boy who was just beginning to explore the world on his own 2 feet. In a few years, Tommy would be old enough to climb onto this horse and rock back and forth, imagination transforming the carved wood into a living, breathing companion for his adventures. But would he know that his grandfather had made it? Would Jessica tell him about the hours I'd spent shaping each piece? Or would the horse become just another toy, its origin forgotten in the chaos of childhood? Helen appeared in the workshop doorway, her expression a mixture of sadness and determination that I'd seen before during difficult times in our marriage. "Michael, I've made a decision." "What kind of decision?" "I'm not going to pretend this isn't happening. Jessica needs to understand that actions have consequences, and that banning loving grandparents from their grandson's first birthday is an action that will have lasting consequences." "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking we should send a gift to Tommy's party, something that makes it clear we wanted to be there, that we love him, and that we're disappointed to be excluded. The rocking horse, and something else, something for Jessica that shows her what she's throwing away." Helen walked to my desk and pulled out a sheet of paper, the good stationery we used for formal correspondence. "I want to write her a letter, not angry, not accusatory, just honest. I want her to understand what this exclusion means to us and what it should mean to her." I set down the rocking horse and really looked at my wife. Helen had supported every decision I'd made as a father, had sacrificed alongside me to give Jessica every opportunity, had never once complained about putting our daughter's needs ahead of our own wants. If Helen was ready to draw a line in the sand, the situation was more serious than even I had realized. "What would you say in this letter?" I'd tell her about the dreams we had when she was born, how we imagined being the kind of grandparents who were present for every milestone, every celebration, how we've been planning Tommy's first birthday party for months, looking forward to seeing his face when he tears the wrapping paper off his presents. Helen's voice was steady, but I could see the pain in her eyes. I'd tell her about the photo album I've been keeping since Tommy was born. Every picture, every little milestone, every funny thing he's done, how I planned to show it to him when he was older so he could see how much his grandparents treasured every moment of his first year. And I'd ask her if she really thinks protecting Brad's pride is worth depriving Tommy of grandparents who love him unconditionally. The idea crystallized in my mind like a joint sliding perfectly into place. Not just the rocking horse, not just Helen's letter, but something bigger. Something that would show Jessica exactly what she was choosing when she chose conditional. Love over unconditional love. Helen, what if we did more than send a letter? What do you mean? What if we showed Jessica the difference between the kind of love that demands payment and the kind of love that gives freely, even when it's not appreciated? Helen studied my face with the intensity of a woman who'd learned to recognize when her husband was planning something significant. "I'm listening. Tommy's going to need things as he grows up. College fund, help with his first car, maybe assistance with a down payment on his first house. The kinds of things grandparents traditionally help with. Yes, what if we set all of that up now? Not as a loan to Brad and Jessica, not as help they have to ask for or feel grateful for, but as Tommy's inheritance from grandparents who love him. Go on. We establish accounts in Tommy's name that his parents can't touch, can't borrow against, can't use to fund Brad's business expansions. Money that will be there for Tommy when he needs it, regardless of how his parents feel about us." Helen was quiet for a long moment, her mind working through the implications of what I was suggesting. That would mean Jessica and Brad couldn't use Tommy as leverage to get money from us. Exactly. If Tommy's future is already secure, they can't threaten to keep him away from us unless we fund their present wants. But it also means we're planning for a future where we might not have a relationship with Jessica. The thought hurt more than I wanted to admit. Helen, we might not have a relationship with Jessica anyway if this pattern continues. Every time they need money, every time I don't give them exactly what they want, exactly when they want it, we'll go through this same cycle. So we break the cycle. We break the cycle. Helen nodded slowly, and I could see her making the same difficult decision I'd been wrestling with for days. How much money are we talking about? The $150,000 Brad wanted to borrow, plus the $30,000 he already owes me, plus whatever we would have spent on gifts and help over the next 20 years. Maybe $300,000 total. That's a significant portion of our retirement savings. It is. But Helen, what good is retirement money if we can't enjoy our retirement because we're constantly fighting with our daughter about financial boundaries? She was quiet for several minutes, staring out the workshop window at the maple trees that were now showing serious color, red and gold and orange leaves, catching the late afternoon sun. Michael, if we do this, there's no going back. We'll be making a statement about the relationship we expect to have with Jessica and Brad going forward. I know. And there's no guarantee it will work. They might just be angry that we've put money aside for Tommy instead of giving it to them directly. They might be. But if it does work, if it shows Jessica that real love doesn't come with strings attached, then maybe we get our daughter back. And maybe Tommy grows up knowing he had grandparents who loved him enough to think about his future, even when his parents were too focused on their present. Helen walked to the rocking horse and ran her hand along its mane, the same gentle touch. She'd used to soothe Jessica's fears as a child. What would we say to her? In the letter, I mean. I considered the question, thinking about all the things I wanted Jessica to understand about love and family and the difference between helping and enabling. We'd tell her the truth, that we love her and Tommy unconditionally, that we're disappointed to be excluded from his first birthday, but we understand that she feels she needs to choose between loyalty to her husband and relationship with her parents. And we'd tell her that we've made our own choice. We choose to love Tommy without conditions, without expectations, without demanding anything in return. And that love will be there for him, regardless of how his parents feel about his grandparents. Helen smiled for the first time in days, and I recognized the expression. It was the same look she'd had when we'd made the difficult decision to refinance the house to pay for Jessica's college. The same resolve that had carried us through 40 years of marriage and business ownership and parenting challenges. When do we send it? The day of Tommy's birthday party. While they're all celebrating without us, Tommy will receive the most important gift of his first year, the promise that he'll never have to choose between loving different members of his family. And Jessica? Jessica will learn that the love she tried to use as a bargaining chip was never for sale in the first place. That evening, Helen and I sat at our kitchen table with cups of coffee growing cold between us, trying to find words for feelings that seemed too big for language. The house felt different somehow, as if Jessica's absence from our future had already begun to change the very air we breathed. I keep thinking about when she was little, Helen said, staring into her untouched coffee. Remember how she used to have those nightmares about being lost? I remembered. Jessica had gone through a phase around age 5 when she'd wake up crying, convinced that she'd somehow gotten separated from us and couldn't find her way home. Helen and I would take turns sitting beside her bed, promising that we would never, ever let her get lost. She'd make us promise that we'd always come find her, no matter what. And we did promise, every time. So how did we get to a place where she's the one doing the leaving? The question hung between us like smoke from a fire that wouldn't quite die. I reached across the table and took Helen's hand, her wedding ring catching the kitchen light the same way it had for 38 years. I don't think she sees it as leaving, Helen. I think she sees it as choosing. choosing what over what, choosing loyalty to Brad over accommodation to us, choosing her nuclear family over her extended family, choosing her independence over what she sees as our interference. Helen's fingers tightened around mine, but we never interfered. We helped when asked, stayed out of their business otherwise, never criticized Brad even when what? Helen was quiet for a moment, and I could see her debating whether to voice thoughts she'd been keeping to herself, even when I noticed how he talks to her sometimes, like she's not quite smart enough to understand important matters. You never mentioned that before, because it wasn't my place to mention it. But Michael, I've watched that man explain basic concepts to our daughter like she's a child, while she nods and agrees, even though she knows more about budgeting and financial planning than he'll ever know. I thought about the July conversation when Jessica had questioned Brad's expansion plans, then immediately doubted her own instincts when confronted with his business degree and charts. She's changed since she married him. She's diminished herself. Since she married him, the Jessica who graduated summa cum laude, who could argue philosophy and literature with her professors, who had opinions about everything, where did she go? She's still there, Helen, but she's learned to keep quiet, to keep the peace. And now she's chosen keeping the peace with Brad over keeping the peace with us. The truth of that statement settled heavily between us. In Jessica's mind, this wasn't about money or family loyalty or grandparental rights. It was about proving to her husband that she would prioritize his feelings over everyone else's, including her own parents. Helen, can I tell you something I've been thinking about? Always. I don't think Jessica is happy. Helen looked up sharply. What makes you say that? Little things. The way she deflects when we ask about her plans. The way she changes the subject when Brad starts talking about his business goals. The way she seemed relieved when Tommy was born because it gave her something to focus on besides her marriage. You think she regrets marrying Brad? I think she regrets who she's become since marrying Brad, but I don't think she knows how to find her way back to who she used to be. Helen stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the darkness that had settled over our neighborhood. Saturday evening in Cedar Falls, families finishing dinner and settling in for quiet nights at home. Somewhere across town, our daughter was probably putting Tommy to bed while her husband planned the birthday party we wouldn't be attending. Michael, what if we're wrong about this? What if excluding us from Tommy's party really will make their marriage stronger? Then they'll have a stronger marriage built on excluding people who love them. Is that the kind of strength you want for Jessica? No. I want her to be strong enough to include the people who've always supported her, even when her husband would prefer otherwise. Then we're doing the right thing. Helen turned back to face me, and I could see the resolve forming in her expression, like dawn breaking over familiar landscape. Tell me about this account you want to set up for Tommy. I walked to my desk and pulled out the legal pad where I'd been sketching ideas for the past few hours. Numbers, conditions, timeline, the framework for a gift that would protect Tommy's future while teaching Jessica about unconditional love. A trust fund with specific conditions. Tommy gets access to the money in stages. College tuition at 18, help with his first house at 25, the remainder when he turns 30 or gets married, whichever comes first. And his parents. His parents can't touch it, can't borrow against it, can't use it as collateral. The money exists for Tommy alone, administered by trustees who aren't emotionally involved in family conflicts. Who would be the trustees? My attorney suggested a bank trust department, professional management, no family politics, decisions based solely on Tommy's best interests. Helen studied my notes, her teacher's mind working through the implications and potential complications. This would mean Jessica and Brad could never use Tommy's needs as justification for asking us for money. Exactly, college tuition, already handled, first car, covered, wedding expenses, Tommy will have his own money for that. They're going to be furious. Maybe. Or maybe they'll be relieved that they don't have to worry about Tommy's future and they can focus on managing their own finances responsibly. Helen sat back down at the table, her coffee now completely cold, but her attention fully focused on the conversation that would determine our family's future. Michael, how much of this is about helping Tommy, and how much is about teaching Jessica a lesson? The question cut straight to the heart of my motivations, and I knew Helen deserved an honest answer. Both. I want Tommy to have opportunities regardless of his parents' financial decisions, but I also want Jessica to understand that love doesn't have to be earned through financial compliance. And if this damages our relationship with her permanently, Helen, what relationship do we have left if every interaction is about money? If every family gathering becomes an opportunity for Brad to hint about loans, and every refusal results in punishment through limited access to Tommy, we have the relationship she's willing to give us, which isn't much of a relationship at all. Helen was quiet for a long time, her gaze moving between my legal pad and the family photos that covered our refrigerator. Pictures of Jessica at every age, from newborn to wedding day to new mother, a visual timeline of the dreams we'd had and the sacrifices we'd made to help those dreams come true. If we do this, we need to do it right. Not as a punishment, not as manipulation, but as a genuine gift. Agreed. And we need to explain it in a way that shows love, not disappointment. What would that sound like? Helen stood up and walked to my desk, picking up a pen and a fresh sheet of paper. It would sound like grandparents who love their grandson so much that they want to make sure his future is secure, regardless of any temporary difficulties between the adults in his life. She began writing, her handwriting still neat and precise, despite her age. "Dear Tommy," she read aloud as she wrote, "Today is your first birthday, and although we can't be there to celebrate with you in person, we want you to know that your grandparents love you more than words can express." I watched her write, remembering all the notes she'd sent to Jessica over the years, in lunchboxes, tucked into college care packages, attached to birthday presents. Helen had always been the one with the words to express what we both felt. "Because we love you so much, we've made arrangements to ensure that your dreams will never be limited by financial concerns. When you're ready for college, the money will be there. When you want to buy your first house, you'll have help. When you're ready to start your own family, you'll have the security to make choices based on love rather than fear." That's beautiful, Helen. This isn't money your parents need to pay back or feel grateful for. This is your inheritance from grandparents who believe in your potential and want to support your future, no matter what. She set down the pen and looked at what she'd written. Is that the right tone? Loving without being manipulative. I'm perfect. What about Jessica? Do we write a separate letter to her? Helen picked up the pen again, but this time she hesitated before writing. What would we want to say to her? I thought about all the conversations we'd never had, all the concerns I'd swallowed to avoid conflict, all the times Helen and I had looked at each other with worry, but said nothing because we didn't want to interfere. We'd want to tell her that we understand she needs to prioritize her marriage, but that we hope she remembers that good marriages are strengthened by loving relationships with extended family, not threatened by them. And that we love her enough to step back when our presence causes conflict, but we also love Tommy enough to ensure he has choices she might not be able to give him. Helen began writing again, her words careful and measured. Dear Jessica, we're disappointed that we can't share Tommy's first birthday with all of you, but we respect your decision to keep the celebration small. We want you to know that our love for you and Tommy isn't conditional on being included in every family event. She paused, considering her next words. We've established a trust fund for Tommy that will ensure his future security regardless of any challenges your family might face. This isn't a criticism of your financial management or a statement about our confidence in Brad's business ventures. It's simply a gift from grandparents who want to support their grandson's dreams. Should we mention the money we would have spent on lawyers if this had become a custody battle? Michael! Helen's voice carried a warning. This is about love, not leverage. She was right. The letter had to come from a place of genuine care, not hurt or anger or the desire to prove a point. We hope that someday we'll be able to participate more fully in Tommy's life, but until then, we'll continue to love both of you from a distance. Family doesn't end because of disagreements, and our door will always be open when you're ready to walk through it. Helen set down the pen and read through what she'd written. Does that sound right? Like people who are hurt but still hopeful? It sounds like us. It sounds like the parents Jessica used to know before money became more important than relationships. Then that's what we'll send. The letters, the rocking horse, and the legal documents establishing Tommy's trust fund. His first birthday present will be the promise that his grandparents will always love him, even when his parents don't want us around. I looked at my wife of 38 years, the woman who'd supported every difficult decision I'd made as a father and business owner, and felt the familiar gratitude that had sustained our marriage through decades of challenges. Helen, are you sure about this? Once we set up this trust fund, we can't undo it. The money belongs to Tommy, regardless of how our relationship with Jessica develops, I'm sure. Because this isn't really about our relationship with Jessica. It's about our responsibility to Tommy. And our responsibility is to love him unconditionally, which means loving him even when it's inconvenient for his parents. Even when it costs us access to his childhood, especially when it costs us access to his childhood, because the love that gives freely is the love that lasts forever. I gathered up Helen's letters and my legal notes, feeling the weight of decisions that would echo through Tommy's entire life and possibly reshape our family forever. When should we send everything? Tomorrow morning. Special delivery, time to arrive right when the party starts. So while everyone else is giving Tommy toys he'll outgrow, we'll be giving him something that will still matter when he's a grown man with children of his own. And if Jessica calls afterward, angry about what we've done. Helen smiled, and I recognized the expression from dozens of difficult conversations over the years, the look of a woman who'd made a decision she could live with, regardless of the consequences. Then we'll tell her the same thing we've always told her when she's angry about our choices. We love her, we want what's best for her, and we trust that someday she'll understand why we did what we did. Even if someday is years from now. Even if someday is years from now. Because, Michael, some gifts are too important to wait for permission to give. The next morning, I woke before dawn with the kind of nervous energy that usually preceded major business decisions. But this wasn't about profit margins or contract negotiations. This was about the most important relationship in my life, and I was about to alter it permanently. I found Helen in the kitchen, already dressed and nursing a cup of coffee that was probably her second or third. She'd arranged the items we were sending to Tommy on the kitchen table like pieces of a puzzle that would either complete or destroy the picture of our family. The rocking horse sat in the center, its finish gleaming in the morning light. Months of careful work, every curve and joint shaped with love and patience. Next to it, Helen had placed the sealed letters in elegant envelopes addressed in her careful script. And beside those, the legal documents that would secure Tommy's financial future while forever changing the dynamics of how our family handled money. Second thoughts? I asked, pouring my own coffee. Third and fourth thoughts, but not enough to change my mind. I picked up the trust documents, reviewing once more the decisions we'd made in consultation with my attorney. $300,000 total, invested conservatively with distributions tied to Tommy's education and major life milestones. The The trustees would be professionals with no emotional investment in family politics, making decisions based solely on Tommy's documented needs and the trust's stated purposes. Helen, Tommy's going to be a wealthy young man because of this. Tommy's going to be a secure young man because of this. There's a difference. She was right. The money wasn't enough to make Tommy lazy or entitled, but it was enough to ensure that his choices would be based on his interests and talents rather than financial limitations. What time does the party start? 2 o'clock. I called the courier. Service? Everything will be delivered at exactly 1:30, just as people are starting to arrive. I imagined the scene. Brad and Jessica greeting guests, Tommy napping or playing with his first birthday decorations. Everyone gathering to celebrate the milestone that Helen and I would miss. Do you think Tommy will remember this birthday when he's older? He won't remember the party, but he might remember the story of the grandparents who loved him enough to think about his future, even when they couldn't be part of his present. Helen stood up and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the October morning that was bright with autumn color. Our maple trees were at peak, gold and red leaves catching the sunlight like living fire. Michael, I keep thinking about something. My mother told me when Jessica was born. What was that? She said the hardest part of being a parent wasn't the sleepless nights or the worry or even the financial sacrifice. The hardest part was learning when to hold on and when to let go. And I think today we learn whether we're strong enough to let go with love instead of holding on with resentment. I joined Helen at the window, both of us looking out at the neighborhood where we'd raised Jessica, where we'd dreamed of someday teaching our grandchildren to ride bicycles and build tree forts, and appreciate the simple pleasures that made life meaningful. Helen, what if we're wrong? What if this gesture just makes Jessica angrier, more determined to keep us out of Tommy's life? Then we'll have done the right thing for the wrong reasons, and we'll deal with the consequences. And if we're right, if this shows Jessica that our love doesn't come with conditions, then maybe we get our daughter back. And maybe Tommy grows up understanding that families can disagree about money without destroying their love for each other. At 10 o'clock, the courier arrived to collect our package. A young man in a uniform, probably not much older than Jessica, who handled our carefully wrapped gifts with professional efficiency. Special delivery for Master Tommy Turner Thompson, he confirmed, checking his clipboard. To be delivered at exactly 1:30 p.m., signature required from an adult at the residence. That's correct. And there's a note here that says the delivery should be opened immediately in front of witnesses. Helen and I had debated that instruction. We wanted the trust documents to be revealed publicly, so Jessica couldn't minimize or dismiss what we'd done. But we also didn't want to embarrass her in front of her friends. Yes, that's correct. The package contains materials that are meant to be shared with the birthday party guests. After the courier left, Helen and I found ourselves with 8 hours to wait and nothing to do but worry about the decision we'd already made and couldn't unmake. Want to take a drive? Helen suggested. Where to? Let's go see the house where Jessica grew up, the old neighborhood. We'd moved from our starter home when Jessica was 10, upgrading to the house where we still lived as my furniture business. Became more successful, but the little ranch house on Elm Street held some of our favorite memories as a young family. The 15-minute drive took us past the elementary school where Jessica had learned to read, the park where she'd played softball. In middle school, the church where we'd attended services every Sunday until she'd left for college. Remember when she decided she wanted to be a veterinarian? Helen asked, as we drove past the animal clinic where we'd taken our old retriever, Max. She was 8 years old, and she was convinced she could cure every sick animal in Iowa. We bought her that plastic doctor kit, and she practiced on Max for months. Poor Max, he was the most over-examined dog in Cedar Falls. We pulled up in front of the house on Elm Street, now occupied by a young family with tricycles in the driveway and Halloween decorations on the porch. I could see Jessica's old bedroom window, the one where she'd hung her honor roll certificates, and debate team ribbons. She was so proud of her achievements, Helen remembered. Remember how she'd make us read every paper she wrote, every test she got back, every teacher's note about her progress. She wanted us to be proud of her. We were proud of her. We still are. Then why does it feel like we lost her somewhere along the way? Helen took my hand, her touch warm and familiar after nearly 4 decades of shared experiences. We didn't lose her, Michael. She lost herself, and now she's trying to find her way back, but she's looking in the wrong direction. What do you mean? I mean she's looking for validation from Brad when she should be looking for validation from herself. She's trying to prove her worth through his success instead of recognizing her own value. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching. The current residents of Jessica's childhood home go about their Saturday morning routines. A father washing his car while his daughter helped with the soap. A mother hanging laundry on a line in the backyard. Ordinary domestic happiness, the kind Helen and I had shared for decades. Helen, do you think Jessica is happy? I think Jessica is trying very hard to convince herself that she's happy. That's not the same thing. No, it's not. But it might be the best she can do until she figures out what would actually make her happy. At noon, we drove home and made sandwiches. Neither of us wanted to eat. The kitchen felt different with the rocking horse gone, as if the absence of the gift had created a hole in our normal routine. 1 hour and 30 minutes, Helen observed, checking the kitchen clock. Are you nervous? Terrified. You? The same, but also hopeful. Hopeful that Jessica will understand what we're trying to say. Hopeful that love is stronger than pride. That our relationship with our daughter can survive this test. At 1 o'clock, we gave up pretending to be busy and sat together on the living room couch, watching the clock tick toward the moment that would determine our family's future. Helen, if this works, if Jessica calls to thank us and apologize for excluding us, what do we say? We say we love her and we're glad she understands that our love was never contingent on getting our own way. And if it doesn't work, if she calls angry about what we've done. Helen was quiet for a moment, considering the possibility that our gesture of love would be interpreted as manipulation or criticism. Then we say we love her anyway, and that Tommy's trust fund will be there for him regardless of how she feels about us. Because, Michael, that's the truth. The money belongs to Tommy now, and it always will, no matter what happens between the adults in this family. At 1:30, both of us stared at the clock as if we could will time to slow down. Somewhere across town, a courier was knocking on Jessica's door with a package that contained our hopes for reconciliation and our promise of unconditional love. It's done, Helen said quietly. It's done, I agreed. Now we could only wait to see whether our gift would heal our family or divide it forever. For the next 2 hours, Helen and I moved through our house like actors who'd forgotten their lines. We straightened things that were already straight, cleaned surfaces that were already clean, and made conversation that carefully avoided the topic consuming both our minds. At 3:30, Helen was reorganizing our photo albums for the 3rd time when she suddenly stopped and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen before. Michael, I want to write another letter. To whom? To Jessica. But not the polite, diplomatic letter we sent today. I want to write the letter I would have written if I hadn't been trying to be understanding and mature. I set down the newspaper I'd been pretending to read. What would that letter say? Helen walked to my desk and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, her movements sharp with sudden purpose. It would say that I'm furious with her, that I'm heartbroken and disappointed and tired of pretending that her behavior is acceptable just because she's our daughter. Helen, no, let me say this. Let me write it down, even if we never send it. She began writing with quick, angry strokes, her handwriting less controlled than usual. Dear Jessica, she read aloud as she wrote, today was supposed to be one of the happiest days of our lives, your son's first birthday, surrounded by family who love him. Instead, we spent the day wondering what we did wrong to deserve being excluded from our grandson's celebration. I watched my wife, usually the peacemaker in our family, finally allow herself to express the anger she'd been suppressing for weeks. For 29 years, we've made excuses for your choices. When you married a man who treats our family like his personal bank, we said you were young and would learn better judgment. When you started supporting his demands for money we couldn't afford to lose, we said you were being a loyal wife. Helen, maybe you shouldn't. When you began treating our concern about your finances like criticism of your marriage, we learned to keep our mouths shut. When you started limiting our time with Tommy based on our willingness to fund Brad's dreams, we tried to be patient and understanding. She was crying now, tears of frustration and hurt that had been building for months. But today, you crossed a line we didn't even know existed. You used our grandson as a weapon to punish us for making a responsible financial decision. You chose your husband's pride over your parents' love, and you taught Tommy's first birthday party that conditional love is normal and acceptable. I pulled up a chair beside Helen and put my arm around her shoulders. What else would you say? To her, I would say that we raised her better than this, that we taught her the difference between right and wrong, between loyalty and enabling, between love and manipulation. And I would ask her when she decided that those lessons didn't apply to how she treats her own parents. Helen set down the pen and leaned into my embrace, her anger dissolving into the deeper sadness that had been driving it all along. I would. Tell her that we don't recognize the woman she's become, and we miss the daughter we raised. Do you feel better having written that? I feel more honest. And I feel like we made the right decision today, even if it doesn't work the way we hope. Why? Because at least we acted from love instead of from anger. The letter we sent came from the part of us that wants to heal our relationship with Jessica. This letter comes from the part that wants to hurt her the way she's hurt us. And which part is stronger? Helen looked at the angry letter she'd written, then at the family photos covering our walls, decades of Christmas mornings and birthday parties and ordinary moments that had created the foundation of our love for Jessica. The part that loves her is stronger, but the part that's angry with her is real too, and pretending it doesn't exist hasn't been helping anyone. At 4 o'clock, our phone rang. We both froze, looking at the caller ID as if it might tell us whether the conversation ahead would heal or hurt us. It's Jessica, Helen said quietly. I picked up the phone on the 4th ring, my heart hammering against my ribs. Hello, sweetheart. Silence. Then the sound of crying, not angry tears, but the deep, wrenching sobs of someone whose world has just shifted on its axis. Jessica, are you all right? Dad. Her voice was broken, barely recognizable. Dad, what did you do? We sent Tommy a birthday present, and we sent you a letter explaining why we couldn't be there in person. The money. Dad, the trust fund, why would you? She couldn't finish the sentence, but I could hear other voices in the background, the sounds of a party that had been interrupted by revelations no one had expected. Because we love Tommy, and we wanted to make sure his future was secure, regardless of any difficulties the adults in his life might have. But $300,000, Dad, that's your retirement money. Some of it, yes. But Helen and I decided that watching our grandson grow up with opportunities was more important than padding our own retirement account. More crying, voices in the background that sounded confused, concerned, possibly angry. Jessica, are you at the party? Everyone's here, Dad. Everyone saw the letters, the legal documents, the rocking horse. Everyone heard me read your letter aloud. And how do you feel about what we did? A long pause. The sound of Jessica walking away from the crowd, probably, to find privacy for a conversation that was too personal for party guests. I feel ashamed. The word hit me like a physical blow. Ashamed of what we did. Ashamed of what I did. Of what I've become. Dad, when I read your letter to the party guests, when I had to explain why my parents weren't at their grandson's first birthday, I heard myself through other people's ears for the first time. What did you hear? I heard a woman who chose her. Husband's pride over her parents' love. I heard someone who used her child as leverage to get money from people who've spent their lives supporting her. I heard... She couldn't finish, but I could fill in the blanks. She'd heard someone she didn't recognize, someone who'd lost herself in a marriage that demanded she choose sides instead of building bridges. Jessica, we didn't do this to embarrass you. I know you didn't. That's what makes it worse. You could have humiliated me by telling everyone about Brad's unpaid loans, or about how he's been pressuring you for money, or about how I've been supporting his demands. Instead, you just loved Tommy and trusted me to understand what you were trying to say. And do you understand? I understand that you've been watching your daughter disappear into someone you don't recognize, and you've been trying to love me back to myself without criticizing the choices that were taking me away from who I used to be. I looked at Helen, who was listening to my side of the conversation with tears streaming down her face. What happens now, sweetheart? Now I have to figure out how to be the woman you raised me to be while staying married to a man who seems to need me to be someone smaller. The honesty in her voice gave me more hope than I'd felt in months. Do you think that's possible? I don't know. But I know I can't keep pretending that the way we've been handling money and family relationships is normal or healthy. What does Brad think about the trust fund? Another pause. Brad is processing. He's angry that you went around him to secure Tommy's future, but he's also relieved that college tuition and other major expenses are covered. And he's embarrassed that everyone at the party now understands exactly why you refused to loan him money for his expansion. Jessica, we never intended to embarrass Brad. I know, Dad, but maybe he needed to be embarrassed. Maybe we both did. Are you still angry with us? I'm grateful to you, and I'm sorry, and I'm scared about what I need to do to fix the mess I've made of our relationship. You haven't made a mess, sweetheart. You made some choices that didn't work out the way you'd hoped. That's different. Is it too late to unmake some of those choices? I looked around our living room, at the empty space where Tommy's rocking horse had been just that morning, at Helen, who was listening with cautious hope, at the family photos that reminded me of the daughter I'd always known was still there, underneath the confusion and poor decisions. It's never too late to choose love over pride, Jessica. It's never too late to remember who you really are. Can I bring Tommy over tomorrow? I want him to see his grandparents, and I want to start figuring out how to be your daughter again, instead of someone you don't recognize. Helen was nodding frantically, tears of relief replacing the tears of frustration she'd been crying for weeks. Of course you can come over. You're always welcome here, Jessica. Both of you. What about Brad? I considered the question carefully. Brad is welcome too if he wants to come. But sweetheart, you don't need Brad's permission to have a relationship with your parents. I know. I'm just starting to remember that. After Jessica hung up, Helen and I sat together on our couch, holding hands and trying to process what had just happened. Our gesture of love had been received as love, not manipulation. Our daughter had heard our message and understood it. Our family might actually survive this crisis stronger than before. Helen, do you think we did the right thing? I think we did the loving thing. And sometimes that's the same as the right thing, and sometimes it's not. But it's always better than the safe thing. Are you ready to have Jessica and Tommy here tomorrow? I've been ready for that since the day Jessica told us not to come to the party. And Brad, if he comes too? Helen smiled, and I recognized the expression of a woman who'd found her strength through facing her fears. Then Brad will learn what the rest of us know, that this family's love isn't for sale, but it's freely given to anyone willing to receive it without conditions. I looked at the clock. 5:15 on a Saturday afternoon that had started with nervous anticipation and was ending with cautious hope. Helen. I think we got our daughter back. I think she got herself back. We just reminded her who she was. Before she got lost. Sunday morning dawned crisp and clear, one of those perfect October days in Iowa when the air smells like apples and wood smoke and possibilities. Helen was up before sunrise, making preparations for Jessica and Tommy's visit. With the careful attention she'd once brought to hosting Christmas dinner for 20 people. "Helen, you don't need to cook for an army," I observed, watching her pull out ingredients for what appeared to be a full Sunday feast. "It's just Jessica and Tommy coming over." "It's the first time in months that our daughter is choosing to spend time with us," Helen replied, not looking up from her recipe card. "I want everything to be perfect." I understood. This wasn't just lunch for Helen, it was a celebration of reconciliation, a chance to show Jessica that our home was still her refuge, that our love was still the constant she could count on, regardless of how complicated the rest of her life became. At 11 o'clock, we heard a car in our driveway. Helen and I both moved to the living room window, watching as Jessica parked her modest sedan and began the process of extracting a 1-year-old and all the equipment that comes with traveling with a toddler. Tommy had grown in the month since. We'd seen him regularly. He was standing now, holding onto Jessica's hands as he took wobbly steps toward our front door. His hair was getting longer, starting to curl at the ends like Jessica's had at that age. "He's walking," Helen breathed, her voice thick with emotion. "Look how steady he is." Jessica knocked softly on our door, as if she wasn't sure of her welcome. Despite yesterday's phone call, I opened it to find my daughter looking younger somehow, less burdened than she'd appeared in recent months. "Hi, Dad." "Hi, sweetheart. Come in." Tommy looked up at me with curious eyes, clearly remembering something about this tall man with the grey beard, but not quite sure what. I knelt down to his level, letting him decide whether he wanted to approach or maintain his distance. "Hello, Tommy, I'm your grandpa, Michael." Tommy studied me for a moment, then let go of Jessica's hands and took 3 unsteady steps in my direction before sitting down hard on our entryway rug. "He remembers you," Jessica said softly. "Do you think so? He doesn't usually approach strangers, but with you, it's like he knows you're safe." Helen appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron and trying not to cry at the sight of her grandson taking his first steps in our house. "Tommy, look how big you've gotten." Tommy looked up at Helen and began babbling in the language that only 1-year-olds understand, his tone clearly conversational, even if his words weren't quite formed yet. "I think he's telling us about his party yesterday," Jessica translated with a small smile. "And what would he say about his party?" Jessica's smile faded slightly. "He'd probably say that there was cake and presents and lots of people, but something important was missing." We moved into the living room. Tommy immediately gravitating toward the basket of toys Helen had been collecting for months. Wooden blocks, soft books, simple puzzles designed to engage a curious toddler's mind. "Jessica, how are you feeling today? About everything that happened yesterday?" Jessica settled into the chair where she'd done homework as a teenager, where she'd called to share news about college acceptance letters and job interviews, and her engagement to Brad. Confused, grateful, ashamed, hopeful. She watched Tommy explore his toys with the focused attention that reminded me of her own childhood curiosity. All at the same time. "Tell us about the party. After we talked yesterday. It was educational." Having to explain to 20 people why my parents weren't at their grandson's first birthday party forced me to hear my own justifications out loud. And how did they sound? Selfish, small, like the excuses of someone who'd forgotten what really matters. Helen sat down on the couch across from Jessica, maintaining the careful distance of someone trying not to overwhelm with eagerness. What did Brad say after everyone left? Jessica was quiet for a moment, watching Tommy stack blocks with intense concentration. Brad said a lot of things. Some of them fair, some of them not so fair. Such as? The fair things. He admitted that he's been treating your financial support like an entitlement rather than a gift. He acknowledged that refusing to pay back previous loans while asking for new ones was unreasonable. And he said he understood why you didn't trust him with $150,000 when he hadn't proven trustworthy with $30,000. That must have been difficult for him to say. It was. Brad doesn't like admitting when he's wrong, but having 20 people witness his in-laws' generosity while he'd been treating them like obstacles, it forced him to see himself through other people's eyes. I picked up one of Tommy's blocks and handed it to him, marveling at the perfect coordination required for such a simple action. What were the not-so-fair things he said? Jessica's expression tightened slightly. He accused you of manipulating the situation to make him look bad. He said the timing of the trust fund announcement was calculated to embarrass him in front of our friends. And what did you tell him? I told him that you could have embarrassed him much worse by sharing details about the money he's already borrowed and never repaid. I told him that establishing Tommy's trust fund was about loving your grandson, not about punishing your son-in-law. How did he respond to that? He got quiet, which for Brad usually means he's processing something he doesn't want to admit. Helen leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle but direct. Jessica, can I ask you something that might be difficult to answer? Of course. Are you happy in your marriage? The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire that couldn't be ignored. Jessica looked at her son, who had successfully built a tower of 3 blocks and was contemplating the addition of a 4th. I'm happy with parts of my marriage. I love being Tommy's mother. I love the idea of building a life with someone who shares my dreams and values. And the parts you're not happy with? I don't like who I become when I'm trying to keep Brad happy. I don't like the way I've learned to make myself smaller so he can feel bigger. The honesty in her voice was devastating and hopeful at the same time. Can those things change? I don't know. Brad would have to want them to change, and I'd have to find the courage to ask for what I need, instead of just accepting what he's willing to give. Tommy's block tower fell over, and instead of crying, he laughed and began building again. The resilience of childhood, the ability to see failure as just another step toward success. Jessica, I said carefully, we want you to know that whatever you decide about your marriage, you and Tommy always have a place here. I know. And that's part of what I need to figure out, whether I've been staying in a difficult marriage because I thought it was my only option, or whether I genuinely want to fight for the relationship Brad and I could have if we both worked on it. Helen stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the backyard where Jessica had played as a child. When you were little, you used to build elaborate cities out of blocks, and then knock them down and start over. You said it was because the fun was in the building, not in having a perfect city that never changed. I remember that. Maybe marriages are like that too. Maybe the question isn't whether you have a perfect relationship, but whether you enjoy the process of building something together. Jessica considered her mother's words while Tommy continued his architectural experiments. The problem is that I feel like I've been the only one building lately. Brad's been focused on tearing down obstacles, like your concerns about money or my questions about our spending, instead of working with me to build something sustainable. And now Now he knows that the obstacles he's been trying to tear down were actually the foundations holding us up. Your support, your concern, your standards, those weren't problems to be eliminated. They were resources to be appreciated. I watched my grandson play, thinking about the legacy we were trying to create for him. Not just financial security, but an understanding of how families could work through difficulties without destroying their love for each other. Jessica, what would you need to see from Brad to believe that your marriage was worth fighting for? She was quiet for a long time, her attention seemingly focused on Tommy's play, but her mind clearly working through complex emotional calculations. I'd need to see him choose our family over his pride. I'd need him to rebuild trust with you and Mom, instead of expecting me to choose between my husband and my parents. And I'd need him to understand that partnership means listening to my concerns, instead of dismissing them as lack of faith. Do you think he's capable of those changes? I think yesterday scared him enough that he might be willing to try. The question is whether he can sustain the effort long enough for the changes to become genuine instead of just tactical. Tommy abandoned his blocks and crawled over to where Jessica was sitting, pulling himself up by her legs and looking at her with the complete trust that children have in their parents. "What does Tommy need from all of this?" Helen asked. Jessica picked up her son and settled him on her lap, his head fitting perfectly in the curve of her shoulder. Tommy needs to grow up understanding that love doesn't come with conditions, that families can disagree without destroying their relationships, and that security comes from being valued for who you are rather than what you can provide. Then, you know what you need to do. I need to model those values, regardless of whether Brad chooses to embrace them or not. I looked at my daughter holding my grandson, both of them safe in the living room, where Helen and I had dreamed of moments exactly like this one. Jessica, we want you to know how proud we are of you. For what? For nearly destroying our relationship. Over money. For having the courage to recognize when something was wrong and the strength to try to fix it. For choosing love over pride when it really mattered. Jessica's eyes filled with tears, not the broken sobs of yesterday's phone call, but the cleaner tears of someone who'd found her way back to herself. I want Tommy to grow up knowing his grandparents. I want him to learn woodworking from Grandpa, and gardening from Grandma, and how to make pie crusts from scratch. He will, Helen promised. All of that and more. Even if things with Brad don't work out the way I hope. Especially if things with Brad don't work out the way you hope. Because Tommy will need to understand that some relationships are permanent and unconditional, even when others aren't. Jessica spent the rest of the afternoon at our house, letting Tommy nap in the portable crib Helen had quietly purchased months ago, sharing lunch at the kitchen table where she'd eaten thousands of meals as a child, talking through the decisions she faced with the careful attention we'd once given to helping her choose a college major. When she finally packed Tommy's things to leave, she moved slowly, as if reluctant to return to the complicated world outside our door. "Jessica," I said as she buckled Tommy into his car seat, "would you like me to talk to Brad? Not to lecture him or make demands, but just to clear the air between us?" "Would you do that?" "Of course. He's Tommy's father and your husband. If our family's going to heal, Brad and I need to find a way to respect each other, even when we disagree." "What would you say to him?" "That we appreciate his acknowledgement of the problems with previous loans, and that we're hopeful the trust fund will remove financial pressure from your relationship so you can focus on building the marriage you both want." Jessica hugged me tightly, the kind of embrace I remembered from her childhood when she needed reassurance that everything would be all right. "Thank you for not giving up on me, Dad, even when I gave you every reason to." "We could never give up on you, sweetheart. You're our daughter, and Tommy is our grandson. That bond doesn't break just because families go through difficult times." As I watched Jessica drive away, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. optimism about our family's future. The trust fund had done more than secure Tommy's financial future. It had reminded all of us what unconditional love looked like in practice. Sometimes the most powerful gifts aren't the ones people ask for, but the ones that show them who they really are and who they could become. 3 days after Jessica's visit, I was in my workshop putting the finishing touches on a child-sized rocking chair, a companion piece to the rocking horse we'd sent to Tommy's party, when I heard a car pull into our driveway. Through the window, I could see Brad's pickup truck, and my first instinct was to wonder if this conversation would go better or worse than the last time my son-in-law had come to my home with money on his mind. Helen appeared in the workshop doorway, her expression cautiously neutral. "Brad's here. He asked if he could talk to you privately. Did he say what about?" "He said he wanted to clear the air about some things. He seemed different, less combative than usual." I set down my sandpaper and walked to the house, finding Brad standing in our living room, looking uncomfortable but determined. He was holding a manila folder and wearing the kind of serious expression that usually preceded important business conversations. "Brad, thanks for coming by. Michael, I need to talk to you about several things, and I'm hoping you'll hear me out before you decide whether you want to throw me out of your house." The humility in his voice was unexpected. I'd been prepared for defensiveness, anger, or manipulation. I hadn't been prepared for what sounded like genuine remorse. "Have a seat. Can I get you coffee, please?" I poured 2 cups from the pot Helen had made an hour earlier, noting that Brad's hands were slightly unsteady when he accepted his mug. "What did you want to talk about?" Brad opened the manila folder and pulled out several documents. Bank statements, payment records, and what appeared to be a business plan with detailed financial projections. "I want to talk about the money I borrowed from you, the money I asked to borrow, and why I thought I had the right to be angry when you said no." He spread the papers on our coffee table with the careful attention of someone who'd been forced to confront uncomfortable truths about his own financial management. "Michael, I've spent the last 3 days going through every transaction, every promise I made about repayment, every justification I gave for why I needed more money from you." "And what did you discover?" "I discovered that I've been treating your family like my personal bank while convincing myself that I was just a victim of temporary cash flow problems." Brad pulled out a calculator and began working through numbers that he'd clearly already calculated multiple times. "The $30,000 I borrowed from you over the past 2 years wasn't for emergencies. It was to cover poor financial decisions I didn't want Jessica to know about." "What kind of poor decisions?" "Inventory purchases that didn't sell, advertising campaigns that didn't work, expansion attempts that were based on optimism rather than market research." Brad's voice carried the flat tone of someone who'd been forced to look at himself without the comfortable buffer of self-deception. "Every time I asked you for money, I already knew I'd made a mistake. But instead of admitting the mistake and learning from it, I convinced myself that the next infusion of cash would solve all my problems. And Jessica didn't know about the underlying problems. I told her we were having temporary difficulties that would resolve themselves once business picked up. I didn't tell her that we were having structural problems that would require fundamental changes in how I managed money." Brad pulled out a payment schedule and showed it to me. "I want to pay you back, all $30,000 with interest. I've worked out a plan that will have everything repaid within 18 months without requiring any additional borrowing." I looked at the payment schedule, which showed monthly amounts that would be significant for a small business owner, but not so large as to be unrealistic. "Brad, this is a good plan, but what's changed? Why are you suddenly able to make payments you couldn't make before?" "What's changed is that I'm finally managing my business like a business instead of like a hobby funded by other people's money." He pulled out another document, what appeared to be a complete financial restructuring of his car lot operations. I've cut my inventory by 30%, focusing on cars that actually sell, instead of cars I think are impressive. I've eliminated the advertising budget until I can prove that marketing expenses generate measurable returns, and I've stopped taking draws from the business until I've established an emergency fund. Those are smart changes. What prompted them? Brad was quiet. For a moment, his attention focused on the coffee cup in his hands. Sitting at Tommy's birthday party, watching 20 people process the fact that my in-laws had secured my son's financial future, while I'd been too irresponsible to secure my own business's future. That must have been difficult. It was humiliating. But it was also educational. Brad looked up and met my eyes directly for the first time since entering our house. Michael, I need you to understand something. When Jessica told me you'd refused to loan me the $150,000 for expansion, my first reaction was anger. I felt like you were sabotaging my dreams because you didn't believe in me. And now I understand that you were protecting your daughter and grandson from the consequences of my poor financial judgment. The expansion I wanted to fund with your money would have failed, just like my previous expansion attempts failed, because I haven't learned to manage success before pursuing growth. What makes you think you're learning those lessons now? Brad pulled out the last document from his folder, what appeared to be a business course catalog from Iowa State University. I've enrolled in a small business management program. Evening classes, so I can still run the lot during the day. Financial planning, inventory management, marketing strategy, all the things I should have learned before I started borrowing money to fund my education through trial and error. The gesture surprised me. Brad had always projected confidence about his business acumen, dismissing suggestions that he might benefit from additional training. That's a smart investment in your future. It's an investment I should have made years ago, instead of expecting other people to subsidize my learning curve. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both of us processing the implications of Brad's apparent transformation from entitled borrower to accountable business owner. Brad, can I ask you something? Of course. What does Jessica think about these changes you're making? Brad's expression shifted, becoming more vulnerable than I'd ever seen it. Jessica is cautiously optimistic. She's been hurt by my financial decisions, and she's tired of having to choose between supporting her husband and maintaining her relationship with her parents. And how do you feel about that choice you've been forcing her to make? I feel like I've been asking my wife to enable my irresponsibility by viewing your responsible concerns as obstacles to overcome. The honesty was startling. This wasn't the defensive, combative man who'd been pressuring Jessica to extract money from her parents. This was someone who'd been forced to confront the gap between his self-image and his actual behavior. What happens now, Brad? With your business, with your relationship with Jessica, with our family. With my business, I focus on building sustainable profitability instead of impressive growth. With Jessica, I prove through actions that I value her partnership more than I value being right. And with your family. He paused, clearly having prepared for this part of the conversation. With your family, I hope I can earn back the trust I lost through my poor decisions and entitled attitude. What would that look like? It would look like treating your support as a gift rather than an entitlement. It would look like listening to your concerns instead of dismissing them as interference. And it would look like making sure Tommy grows up knowing that his parents work together with his grandparents instead of competing against them. I looked at this man who'd married my daughter, fathered my grandson, and spent 2 years treating my family like a financial resource to be exploited rather than relationships to be treasured. Brad, I appreciate you coming here today. This conversation gives me hope that our family can move forward in a healthier way. Does that mean you'll accept my repayment plan? I considered the question carefully. The money had never been about the money. It had been about the pattern of borrowing without accountability, asking without appreciation, taking without giving back. I'll accept your repayment plan, but with one modification. What modification? Instead of paying me back with interest, I want you to pay me back at the original amount and put the interest money into a college savings account for Tommy. Brad's eyes widened. You want me to pay you back less than I owe you? I want you to understand that this family's wealth gets passed down to the next generation, not accumulated by the current generation. The interest on your loan becomes Tommy's inheritance, not my profit. Michael, that's incredibly generous. It's incredibly practical. Tommy will need money for college whether you and I maintain a good relationship or not. This way, your repayment of past mistakes becomes an investment in his future. Brad was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him processing the implications of an arrangement where his accountability to me became his contribution to his son. I accept those terms, and I want you to know that I understand what you're teaching me about how families should handle money. What's that? That money should flow toward the future, not just toward immediate wants. That financial decisions should strengthen family relationships instead of creating obligations and resentments. I stood up and extended my hand to Brad, who stood and shook it with a firm grip. Welcome to the family, son. For real this time. Thank you for giving me the chance to earn that welcome. After Brad left, I found Helen in the kitchen, pretending to organize her recipe box, but obviously waiting to hear how the conversation had gone. Well, I think our son-in-law might actually grow into the man Jessica married, instead of remaining the boy she's been supporting. Really? Really? He's taking responsibility for his mistakes, making concrete plans to change his patterns, and treating our family relationships like something valuable instead of something useful. Helen smiled with the relief of someone who'd been hoping for this outcome but hadn't dared expect it. Does this mean Tommy gets to grow up with parents who work together instead of parents who fight about money? I think it means Tommy gets to grow up understanding that families can work through serious problems without destroying their love for each other. And that might be the most valuable lesson we can teach him. 6 months later, I was putting the final coat of varnish on a custom dining table when Helen appeared in my workshop doorway with an expression I'd learned to recognize over 4 decades of marriage, the look of someone with news that would change our routines in the best possible way. Jessica called, she announced without preamble. Good news or complicated news? Good news that might become complicated news depending on how we handle it. I set down my brush and gave Helen my full attention. I'm listening. She and Brad want to have Tommy's 2nd birthday party here, in our backyard, with the whole family, including his other grandparents. The request caught me off guard. Last year's birthday had been the catalyst for the worst crisis our family had ever faced. This year's birthday could be the celebration of how we'd all grown since then. What did you tell her? I told her we'd love to host Tommy's party, but only if she was sure that's what she and Brad both wanted. Not what they thought they should want. Not what would look good to other people, but what would actually make them happy. And what did she say? She said they'd talked about it extensively, and they both agreed that Tommy should grow up knowing that his grandparents' house is a place where family gatherings happen with joy instead of tension. I walked to the window and looked out at our backyard, imagining it filled with the laughter of children and the comfortable conversation of adults who'd learned to appreciate each other despite their differences. Helen, are we ready for that? Are we ready to host a family party without wondering whether every conversation is going to turn into a conflict about money? I think we are. Brad's been making his payments exactly as scheduled for 6 months. Jessica seems happier and more confident. And Tommy? What about Tommy? Tommy runs to us when he sees us now instead of hiding behind Jessica's legs. He calls us Gamma and Gampa, and he asks where we are when he hasn't seen us for a few days. The image of my grandson looking for us filled me with the kind of gratitude that made other problems seem manageable by comparison. What about the other grandparents? Brad's parents? Jessica said they've been asking to meet us. Apparently they've heard about the trust fund and Tommy's college account, and they want to coordinate their own contributions to his future. Coordinate. How? They're thinking about setting up a trust fund for Tommy's siblings. I looked up sharply. Siblings? Helen's smile widened. That's the news that might become complicated. Jessica's pregnant, about 8 weeks along. The workshop suddenly felt too small to contain the emotions flooding through me. Another grandchild, another chance to be present from the beginning, another opportunity to watch a tiny person discover the world. How is she feeling? Excited, nervous, hopeful that this baby will grow up in a more stable family environment than Tommy experienced in his first year. And Brad? According to Jessica, Brad is determined to be the kind of father who provides security through responsible planning rather than big dreams funded by other people's money. I sat down heavily on my work stool, trying to process the magnitude of what Helen was telling me. In the space of 6 months, our family had gone from fractured and combative to growing and collaborative. Helen, do you think it's real? This change in Brad? This improvement in their marriage? I think the changes are real because they came from consequences, not from promises. Brad didn't decide to become more responsible because Jessica asked him to. He decided to change because continuing his old patterns would have cost him his family. And Jessica? Jessica found her backbone again. She's not the woman who was afraid to disagree with her husband anymore. She's become the woman who insists that her marriage include room for her own thoughts and her parents' involvement. I walked back to the dining table I'd been finishing, running my hand along the smooth surface that would soon hold family meals in someone else's home. What kind of party do they want to have? Simple, backyard barbecue, kids playing on the swing set, adults actually enjoying each other's company, the kind of celebration where Tommy will remember being surrounded by people who love him instead of people who are obligated to tolerate each other. And you think we can pull that off? I think we're going to find out. Because, Michael, this isn't just about Tommy's birthday party. It's about whether we've all learned enough from last year's disaster to create something beautiful this time. That evening I called Jessica to confirm the party plans and to ask about her pregnancy. Dad, I'm so glad you and Mom want to host Tommy's party. It means everything to us to have it be a real family celebration. How are you feeling, sweetheart? About the pregnancy, about everything? I feel like this baby is going to grow up in the family I always wanted Tommy to have. Grandparents who are involved, parents who communicate instead of keeping secrets, financial security that comes from planning rather than borrowing. What's different this time? Everything. Brad and I talk about money now instead of pretending. Problems don't exist. We make decisions together instead of him deciding and me agreeing. And we both understand that our parents are resources to be treasured, not obstacles to be managed. I'm proud of both of you for doing the hard work to rebuild your relationship. Dad, can I tell you something? Always. The trust fund you established for Tommy wasn't just about securing his future. It was about showing Brad and me what real financial planning looks like. Instead of borrowing money to fund dreams, you saved money to fund reality. Is that helping with how you handle your own financial decisions? We have a budget now, an actual written budget that we both follow. We have an emergency fund. And we're putting money aside for this baby's expenses instead of assuming we'll figure it out when the time comes. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, covering party logistics, pregnancy concerns, and the dozens of small details that make family life complicated and wonderful. After I hung up, I found Helen in our bedroom, already making notes about menu planning and party preparation. Helen, do you remember what we said last year about learning when to hold on and when to let go? I remember. I think we learned to let go with love instead of holding on with resentment. And now we get to hold on again, but in a healthier way. What do you mean? I mean, we get to be involved grandparents without being enabling grandparents. We get to support Jessica and Brad's family without subsidizing their mistakes. We get to love our grandchildren without having to negotiate for access to them. Helen looked up from her party planning notes. Are you ready for that? For being grandparents who are welcomed instead of grandparents who are tolerated. I'm ready for Tommy to grow up, knowing that his grandparents' house is a place where he's celebrated, where family problems get solved through conversation and a compromise, where love is given freely but responsibility is expected in return. And the new baby will grow up understanding from day one that families can be complicated without being destructive, that money is a tool for building security rather than a weapon for controlling relationships. Helen smiled and returned to her party planning, already envisioning a backyard filled with the sounds of family celebration. Michael, do you think Tommy will remember this party when he's older? He might not remember the specific details, but he'll remember the feeling. He'll remember being surrounded by adults who enjoyed each other's company, who celebrated his milestones without drama or tension. And that's enough. That's everything, because the feeling of being loved unconditionally, of belonging to a family that works through problems instead of letting them fester, that's the foundation that will support him through whatever challenges he faces as an adult. 2 weeks later, our backyard was transformed into exactly the kind of party Helen and I had dreamed of hosting when Tommy was born. Children playing on the swing set I'd built. Adults sitting around picnic tables sharing stories and laughter. 3 generations of family members who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Brad's parents turned out to be kind, practical people who shared our values about family and financial responsibility. They'd brought a check for Tommy's college fund and detailed plans for supporting the new baby's future needs. We've learned from watching your approach, Brad's mother confided to Helen. Securing grandchildren's futures while teaching their parents to be self-sufficient, that's the kind of legacy we want to create. Tommy spent the afternoon running between grandparents, collecting hugs and treats, and the kind of attention that makes children feel like they're the center of the universe in the best possible way. And Jessica, now showing the first signs of her pregnancy, moved through the party with the confidence of a woman who'd found her place in her own family again. As the sun set and guests began to leave, I found myself standing next to Brad at the edge of our patio, both of us watching Tommy play with the wooden blocks I'd made for his birthday. Michael, I want you to know something. What's that? A year ago, I resented you for having the financial security to help your family while I struggled to support mine. Now I understand that your financial security came from making responsible choices for decades, not from being lucky or privileged. What's the difference? The difference is that I can learn to make responsible choices too. I can build the kind of financial foundation for my family that you built for yours, but I had to stop seeing you as an obstacle to my success and start seeing you as an example of how success really works. I looked at my son-in-law, who'd spent the afternoon engaging with extended family members he'd once viewed as sources of criticism rather than support. Brad, do you know what I see when I look at Tommy? What do you see? I see a little boy who's going to grow up understanding that families can disagree about important things without destroying their relationships. That financial security comes from planning and discipline, not from luck or other people's generosity. And that love doesn't have conditions, but relationships have responsibilities. Those are good lessons. They're the lessons Jessica learned growing up, and they're the lessons that helped her find her way back to herself when she got lost in trying to be someone else. Brad was quiet for a moment, watching his son stack blocks with the focused determination that reminded me of Jessica at the same age. Michael, thank you for not giving up on our family when we gave you every reason to. Thank you for growing into the man Tommy and this new baby deserved to have as a father. As the last guests left, and Helen and I cleaned up the remnants of Tommy's second birthday party, I found myself thinking about the difference between the gifts people ask for and the gifts they actually need. Last year, Brad had asked for $150,000 to expand his business. What he'd actually needed was a lesson in financial responsibility and the motivation to become the husband and father his family deserved. Jessica had asked us to stay away from Tommy's first birthday party. What she'd actually needed was the shock of seeing her parents' unconditional love contrasted with her own conditional loyalty. Tommy had received a trust fund that would secure his financial future. But what he'd actually gained was a family that had learned to work through serious problems without sacrificing their love for each other. Sometimes the most powerful gifts aren't the ones people request, but the ones that show them who they could become if they found the courage to change. 2 years have passed since that October afternoon when Jessica told me not to come to Tommy's first birthday party. As I write this, I'm sitting in my workshop, putting the finishing touches on a crib I've been building for our newest grandchild, Sarah Jessica Turner Thompson, born 3 weeks ago with her father's determined chin and her mother's bright, curious eyes. Tommy, now 3, helped me sand some of the easier pieces, his small hands guided by mine as we worked together on something beautiful for his baby sister. His concentration reminds me of Jessica at that age, focused and determined to do things right. "Gamper, why baby need big bed?" he asked during our last workshop session. "Because babies grow, Tommy. Just like you grew out of your first crib and into your big boy bed. Will I help make things for baby Sarah when she gets bigger? If you want to, absolutely. That's what families do. They help each other build the things that matter." The relationship between Jessica and me has evolved into something deeper and more honest than it was before our crisis. She asks for my advice now, but not because she feels obligated to. She asks because she values my opinion and wants to make decisions that reflect the values Helen and I tried to teach her. Brad has become the son-in-law I'd always hoped he could be, not perfect, but genuine in his efforts to be better. His business has grown steadily through careful management rather than borrowed capital. More importantly, his marriage has grown stronger through shared responsibility rather than divided loyalties. "Michael," he told me last month as we watched Tommy play in our backyard, "I finally understand what you were trying to teach me about money and family." "What's that?" "That the point isn't to get wealthy. The point is to build security for the people you love without sacrificing the relationships that make that security meaningful." The trust fund we established for Tommy continues to grow, managed by professionals who make decisions based on his long-term interests rather than his parents' short-term needs. But more importantly, Tommy is growing up in a family where financial decisions are made openly, where problems are solved through communication rather than manipulation, and where love is given freely without conditions. Brad's parents have established a similar fund for baby Sarah, and both sets of grandparents coordinate our contributions to ensure that both children will have opportunities limited only by their own ambitions and interests. But the real gift we gave our family wasn't financial security. It was the demonstration that love can survive serious disagreements, that relationships can become stronger after being tested, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable behavior that's hurting everyone involved. Last week, Tommy found the angry letter Helen had written to Jessica but never sent, the one where she expressed all her hurt and frustration without the diplomatic restraint of the letter we'd actually mailed. He brought it to me in the workshop, unable to read the words but sensing that it was important. "What this, Gamper?" I took the letter from his small hands, remembering the pain Helen had felt when she'd written it, the hurt that had driven her angry words. "This is something Gamma wrote when she was very sad about some grown-up problems." Why she sad? Because sometimes people we love make choices that hurt us, even when they don't mean to. Did Mommy make Gamma sad? The directness of 3-year-old questions never ceased to amaze me. No diplomatic dancing, no careful wording to avoid uncomfortable truths. "Yes, Tommy, Mommy made some choices that made Gamma and Gampa very sad. But Mommy not sad now. No, Mommy's not sad now, and Gamma and Gampa aren't sad now either. Why not sad anymore?" I looked at my grandson, trying to find words that would convey complex adult emotions in terms a 3-year-old could understand. Because Mommy learned that making Gamma and Gampa sad wasn't making her happy either. So she decided to make different choices. Good choices? Good choices. Tommy nodded with the satisfaction of someone who'd received an answer that made sense in his world, then ran off to find his next adventure. But his questions stayed with me, particularly his observation that Mommy not sad now, because he was right. Jessica radiated a contentment that had been missing during the years when she'd been trying to be someone she wasn't. That evening, I showed Helen the letter Tommy had found, and we read through her words of hurt and frustration together. "Do you still feel that way?" I asked. "About being angry with Jessica?" "No. About being disappointed in the choices she made, sometimes, but not in a way that hurts anymore." "What's the difference?" "The difference is that I can be disappointed in Jessica's choices without being disappointed in Jessica. She made mistakes, but she learned from them and changed her behavior. That's all any parent can ask for. Even after everything we went through." Helen smiled, the expression of someone who'd found peace with a difficult situation, "especially after everything we went through. Because, Michael, our family is stronger now than it was before the crisis. We know we can survive serious disagreements. We know our love for each other is more powerful than our frustrations with each other. And Tommy and Sarah get to grow up in that stronger family. They get to grow up understanding that families work through problems instead of being destroyed by them. That love sometimes requires difficult choices, but that the difficult choices are worth making. This morning, as I put the final coat of finish on baby Sarah's crib, I found myself thinking about the different kinds of gifts we give the people we love. Some gifts are easy. Toys that delight children, jewelry that makes spouses smile, books that feed curious minds. These gifts require money and thoughtfulness, but they don't require sacrifice or risk. Other gifts are harder. Boundaries that protect relationships even when they cause temporary pain, consequences that teach responsibility even when they create conflict, love that continues even when it's not appreciated or reciprocated. The gift Helen and I gave our family 2 years ago wasn't the trust fund, though that will serve Tommy and Sarah well throughout their lives. The real gift was the demonstration that love doesn't mean enabling destructive behavior, that supporting someone sometimes requires refusing to subsidize their mistakes, and that the most caring thing you can do is insist that people live up to their potential instead of accepting their excuses. Jessica learned that marriage doesn't require choosing between your spouse and your parents. It requires building bridges between the people you love instead of burning them. Brad learned that financial security comes from responsible choices repeated over time, not from big dreams funded by other people's money. And Tommy is learning that grandparents are people who love you no matter what, who teach you skills that will last a lifetime, who think about your future, even when you're too young to understand what that means. Baby Sarah will learn all these lessons from birth, growing up in a family where money is handled responsibly, where problems are solved through conversation, and where love is demonstrated through actions rather than just words. The phone rang as I was cleaning up my workshop, interrupting my reflections. Jessica's voice, bright with the exhausted happiness of a new mother. "Dad, Tommy's been asking when he can help you build something for Sarah. He wants to make her a toy box to match the one you made him. Tell him we'll start on it next week, when the crib finish has had time to cure properly. He'll be so excited. Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you think Sarah will grow up feeling as secure as Tommy does now, as loved and supported?" The question revealed Jessica's deepest fear, that somehow she'd mess up with the second child the way she'd nearly messed up with the first. Sarah will grow up even more secure than Tommy, because she'll be born into a family that's already learned how to work through serious problems. She'll never know what it's like to have her parents and grandparents in conflict over money or loyalty. Really? Really? Jessica, you and Brad have built something beautiful together. A marriage based on partnership instead of power struggles, financial security based on planning instead of wishful thinking, and relationships with extended family based on mutual respect instead of obligation. It doesn't always feel beautiful. Sometimes it still feels fragile, like we could mess it up if we're not careful. All good relationships feel fragile sometimes. The difference is that now you have the tools to repair damage instead of just hoping it will go away. After I hung up, I walked through our house, looking at the family photos that now included pictures from Tommy's second and third birthday parties, celebrations filled with laughter instead of tension, gatherings where multiple generations enjoyed each other's company. In the newest photos, you can see the changes in all of us. Jessica looks confident and content, no longer the uncertain young woman trying to please everyone. Brad looks relaxed and genuine, no longer the defensive man covering his insecurities with borrowed confidence. Tommy looks secure and happy, a little boy who knows he's surrounded by adults who treasure him. And Helen and I look like what we always wanted to be, grandparents who are involved in their grandchildren's lives, not because we demanded access, but because we'd earned the trust and respect that made our presence welcomed rather than tolerated. The rocking horse we'd sent to Tommy's first birthday party sits in his bedroom now, worn smooth from years of imaginative adventures. Soon, Sarah will be old enough to ride it too, and Tommy will probably insist on teaching her how to make the horse gallop and jump the way his grandfather had taught him. That continuity, the passing of simple pleasures from one generation and to the next, represents everything we'd hoped to preserve when our family was fracturing over money and pride and the failure to communicate honestly about our needs and fears. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we'd chosen differently. 2 years ago, if we'd given Brad the $150,000 he'd wanted, if we'd accepted Jessica's exclusion from Tommy's life as the price of avoiding conflict, if we'd enabled their irresponsibility instead of insisting on accountability, Tommy would still be loved, but he'd be growing up in a family where financial problems were solved by asking grandparents for money rather than by making responsible choices. Sarah would be born into a marriage where loyalty was demonstrated by excluding extended family rather than by including them in decision-making. And Helen and I would be grandparents whose love was conditional on our willingness to subsidize our son-in-law's business mistakes. People whose access to our grandchildren was determined by our usefulness rather than our relationships. Instead, Tommy is growing up understanding that families work through problems together, that money is a tool for building security rather than a weapon for controlling relationships, and that love sometimes requires difficult conversations but never requires choosing sides. Sarah will grow up in a family where these lessons are simply the air she breathes, normal, natural, the foundation of all her relationships with the people who matter most. The gift we gave our family wasn't money, though the trust funds will serve the children well. The gift was the demonstration that love can be both unconditional and boundaried, that families can disagree about important things without destroying their bonds, and that sometimes the most generous thing you can do is refuse to enable behavior that's hurting everyone involved. As I turned off the workshop lights and prepared to join Helen for dinner, I found myself thinking about the question I'd asked the audience at the beginning of this story. Have you ever been treated as if you didn't deserve to be part of your own family's celebrations? The answer for me turned out to be yes, but only temporarily. Because love that's real, love that's built on genuine care for the other person's well-being rather than just their immediate happiness, finds a way to survive even serious challenges. The invitation to Tommy's first birthday party never came, but the invitation to be part of his life, really, meaningfully part of his life, was extended when we proved that our love was stronger than our hurt, our hope stronger than our disappointment. Sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't hurting the people who hurt you. Sometimes the greatest revenge is loving them so completely, so unconditionally, that they're forced to confront the difference between the people they are and the people they could become. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they choose to become those better people, not because you demanded it, not because you manipulated them into it, but because your love showed them what was possible and gave them the courage to reach for it. Now I want to hear from you. If you were in my position, would you have made the same choice? Would you have been able to show unconditional love to family members who excluded you from precious moments? Could you have turned hurt into healing the way we did? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and click on the bell icon to receive notifications. Stories like these that can move and surprise you are our focus here. Click on the video that just appeared on your screen to hear another incredible story like the one you just saw and heard. Believe me, you won't want to miss it.